today we're going to talk about ways to write a comparison statement in terms of ratios, proportions, differences, and percents. Now, I know we talked about this last week, but I just want to clarify different ways to transition from a ratio to a proportion to a difference to a percent. Just kind of as a refresher from 6th grade math, most of you have kind of had some questions about least common denominator. So with a ratio, if we have the ratio 3 compared to 2, what that tells you is for every 3, let's use math students. So for every 3 math 7 accelerated students, there is 2 math 7 students. So obviously this is a little inaccurate because we have more math 7 students than accelerated students, but just as an example. When you read a ratio, you say for every 3 math 7 accelerated students, there is 2 math 7 students. So that's why another way you can write a ratio is 3 to 2. The third way that you can write a ratio is as a fraction. But when we write a ratio as a fraction, we usually refer to it as a proportion. And when you write it as a fraction, you write it as 3 over 2. So the number that appears first in the ratio, or appears all the way to the left in the ratio, which is the 3, is going to be our numerator. And the number that appears to the right of the ratio is going to be our denominator. So the number that comes first is the numerator, the number that comes second is the denominator. In terms of writing proportions, you can write a proportion most of the time as a fraction. So when I write a proportion, I'm talking about a certain number out of a total. So it is, you can actually write it as a variable out of the total. So for example, if I'm still talking about my ratio, which is 3 to 2, accelerated students compared to math 7 students, my proportion would be in as 3 over the total number of students, which is 5. And it tells me that out of 5 students, or I could say for every 5 students, 3 are enrolled in Math 7 Accelerated. So again, you're looking at a variable over the total number of people. So whenever something asks you for a proportion, you have to know that you have to find the total. So if it only gives you a couple of instances, you want to make sure that you're referencing the total accurately. So the next step is the difference. The difference is just what it sounds like. Difference means subtraction. So for our example, there is 1 more student, right? And that we get as 3 minus 2, whom takes Math 7 Accelerated. And you can say compared to Math 7 if you choose. That might help complete the statement. So there's 1 more student, right? If there's 3 who take accelerated and there's 2 who take regular Math 7, there's 1 more who will take the accelerated class. It's the difference. You find it by subtraction. In terms of the percent can be viewed as a couple of different things. You can write the percent comparing something, or you could write the percent out of the total. Most people choose to write the percent out of the total number of people. So in terms of percent, we want to start with the fraction that we have for our proportion, right? So 3 out of every 5 students takes Math 7 Accelerated. 3 out of every 5. Now we want to know the percentage. Percentage means out of every 100. Now this is the case where we're going to talk about least common denominators for just a second. I want to get from my 5 to a 100. So I need to find the factor that I can multiply 5 by to equal 100. Now that factor is pretty easy to find. You just have to say, okay, how many times does 5 go into 100? Well, 5 goes into 100 20 times. You can also figure that out by long division. You could say, what's 100 divided by 5? And that'll give you your 20. Your 20 is important because that's how you're going to write your magic 1, 20 over 20. If you have an issue remembering what the magic 1 is, the magic 1 is any fraction equal to 1. So fractions that equal 1 have numerators that equal their denominator. That means the number of pieces of the whole are filled up. So if you have 6 over 6, that's a magic 1. 20 over 20, that's a magic 1. That's what we're going to use for this example. So 5 times 20 equals 100. Now I need to multiply 3 by 20 because I can only multiply a number by 1 without changing it. So 3 times 20 is 60. Which gives me 60 over 100. Now I know that my percent is 60% because percent refers to the amount out of 100. So this was kind of the quick review. When do you use ratios? When do you use proportions or fractions? What the difference is, and how to change from a proportion to a percent, or from a ratio to a proportion to a percent. We're almost going back to that fraction, decimal, percent learning from Math 6, so that's why I wanted to do a little bit of a review for you. So why is this important? Where do we use this kind of information? Well, when we're writing comparison statements. We write comparison statements based on data. So in your notes right now, the data that we're going to be using is the Redwood data, the White Oak data, and I believe the Giant Sequoia data. So we're not using any other data. So if you don't want to copy down the swamp chestnut oak or the Florida crossopetalum, you don't have to copy that data down. I would just take a moment, fill in the table for the Giant Sequoia, the Coast Redwood, and the White Oak.